Welcome to the 31st episode of the Decentralized Opportunity podcast. I'm your host, Tanner Lytle, here with your other host,
Wyatt Carson. Hi, Tanner. I'm just going to jump in like we do when we have other interviews. I have a very exciting interview. I've been excited to get on this podcast for a while. His name is Dan Hazing. He's the president of Predictive Customer Behavior Index, which is a mouthful, but I'll have him explain that here in a minute. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Wyatt. How are you?
I'm wonderful. So, real quick, I'll give the background. Dan used to be my boss. We worked at a company, and Dan was a senior VP of operations. Is that correct?
Something like that, yeah.
Anyways, Dan was my boss, and him and I, we got along great. He taught me a lot, and I was just always really impressed with Dan, your intelligence and your ability to articulate things. So I knew you would be awesome on this podcast. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's start off. Give me the 5-second elevator pitch. What the hell do you do, Dan?
well, like as a solopreneur, the real focus is like trying to identify pain and solving someone's pain. So it's very specific to what your customers are going through. So I don't. Maybe we can get into that, some of those details later. But I help companies solve their customer success problems. And customer success is a little misknown. It's really revenue retention. I've had to change my marketing from just customer success and saying that because it's not a universal definition yet. And so it's customer success or revenue retention. So I have a process that I follow when I go into companies that are experiencing some pain around that. And it's been very, very successful at helping people become much more predictive of their customer behavior.
It reminds me almost like you were saying, customer success, people don't really understand that is, but if you tell them, hey, I'm going to give you more money, they definitely want to talk to you. So right, I actually like revenue retention quite a bit.
Yeah. You have to fill that in there because you're just not sure who you're speaking with. And I'm still working for a company that they call it customer success. And, when you're working with a company as a consultant, you adopt their language, but it's not. It's service. It's very reactive service. And they need to build in this retention function that they're going to call account management.
Very good. So
Dan, I just that my tight-lipped on purpose there. I'm just
yes.
Calling it account management. There's nothing I can do about it.
No,
it's not my deal.
Fine. No, you're good. So consulting. When I first met you, I knew that you used to be a consultant, and you're back at it. Heck, I'm a consultant now. When did you decide to get into consulting? Because I find the more I meet, the more consultants I meet, the more very different reasons I understand why people join. So why did you originally get into consulting? Let's start there.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I think this is more common. People don't say, oh, I'm going to leave this job and I'm going to be a consultant. Is you build up a certain amount of knowledge, and then there's an opportunity to get a guerrilla client. It's a client that is huge. It's not normal. And it's somebody that, takes you on as a consultant, and you keep providing them value, and you make a bunch of money and you make them a bunch of money, and it works out great. So I had actually gotten into a situation with a hotel company, and I've always taken sort of the next leap and got into a really cool project. And the floor dropped out in 2008. And, I was sitting there holding this flag, the last one with the chair. And so left that role, was fortunately got paid to leave. And so that's the thing really now, after I've seen that a couple of times, it's if you're working for a big corporation and you're planning on leaving, find a way to get paid to leave. That'd be rule number one. Rule number two, get that one down. Rule number two, then, I was approached like a week after that by one of the franchisees from that organization. And I ended up consulting in London for 3 years, 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. And it sounds very glamorous, but your shoulder started to slump when towards the end of that 2 weeks when you had to travel. But it was a fantastic opportunity. Did really well, made a lot of money. They made them a lot of money. That's the secret to making a lot of money, is making other people a lot of money. It really worked out well. And then it was time to take another W-2 job. And rolled into that, and similar circumstances. So the first 2 times I went into consulting, It was as a result of some sort of major change within an organization. Either there was a sale or whatever, and just then rolling into a consulting opportunity that was just there and became a really big moneymaker. It's not traditional consulting where you have 10 clients, that you have one big one. And then when that runs out, you're like, whoa, this consulting's great. And then it's gone. You're like, oh, this consulting kind of sucks. Mm-hmm. So it's the feast or famine of that. So going through that iteration a couple more times, got connected with more of a marketing program and figured out how to productize the thing that I sell to appeal to more people. But that's not a month or two worth of work. That is like a year's worth of work of running around talking with. If you get lucky, you'll get a couple of customers, but it takes a while to really figure out the market and the pain your customers are having. And you have to almost 100% look at it from their perspective.
Starting off with I love the expression guerrilla customer. You see these all the time. And I always think of a golden collar that gets put around you because they're your world. And so you're, like you said, very feast or famine with it. What are some options that you're going into now?
That was Phil. Sorry, Tanner.
Hi, Phil. No, you're
Phil
good.
Jumped in. Yeah. He's going to cause problems if I didn't pay attention to him. So
yeah.
So anyway, go ahead. Keep going, Tanner. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I was just going to say, so you're going into where you're feast or famine on one client, but now you're trying to diversify to where you're not as dependent on each individual. So if you lose a client, and you inevitably will always lose that client, what is your strategy to get to where you're not so dependent on each individual, but can spread your wings out?
So for me, it was figuring out a product. And for me, it's B2B SaaS software is the perfect fit for customer success because they have recurring revenue. I've ended up also working for a couple of subscription-based companies as well, which is kind of the same thing when you want to retain that subscription revenue. My strategy is direct outreach. So I use a lot of LinkedIn. And there are some marketing campaigns. There's a direct outreach connector where you can connect to a certain number of people on LinkedIn, send a sort of standard message, and then work through that and trying to get sales leads that way. And then I also publish some videos. Once I learned to articulate the pain of my client, it sounds a little like, textbooky or cheesy, I guess. But like once you can really describe the situation someone's going through, and that's the thing I help with, then all of a sudden you start getting people reaching out to you. You become sort of, it's sort of this expert approach to it, but you can't be wrong. Like you can't just throw anything out there. You have to know who you're talking to, and you have to know like what they're going through.
Yeah, I just was pulling up a tweet I saw the other day, and it talks about the solopreneur marketing funnel. So it starts with discovery. So creating a lot of short form content, trust. So things like newsletters, podcasts, YouTube, relationship building an online community, service business, advising, consulting, and coaching, and then eventually productized services. So that's, exactly what you're getting into there. So it is definitely a building blocks.
Yeah, I would say I skipped a couple of those steps and maybe would have done better had I not. I don't know. I don't have a big community. I don't have a lot of that. Although I work in some of the groups, some of the customer success groups. I don't have a self-built community and haven't approached it that way. It's much more direct one-to-one outreach. I also haven't, and this is maybe more of an opinion, I'm not sure it's correct, but I haven't relied on a website to build traffic. There are a lot of folks, I have one because it's table stakes. You have to have one to be in the game, but I haven't done as much marketing as I should. And, the webhooks and a lot of the cookies and things like that, I just haven't gotten involved in that. It's a belief that people don't buy my services that way. But they might, and I just haven't explored that.
Well, when you think of community too, that could be more of a micro community, like you're talking about. You're building it in piece by piece rather than a large audience. And
true.
Many times, people think they need some big thousands of subscribers. But heck, we have 40 some people on YouTube right now at this structure of ours. But it's incredible the amount of momentum we've been getting from what even seems like a small subscriber base.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I have a couple hundred people that follow my company, so it's not thousands, but I have a couple. I have 5,000 connections on LinkedIn. So when I put things out, it gets some views, and most of them are in my target market because those are the folks I connect with.
So I wanted to kind of talk about the solopreneur part of this whole thing. The worst part of being a solopreneur is you have to do everything. I remember Dan, follow on LinkedIn. We text now and then. But I remember when you started creating video content, it felt like it was instantly really good, like suspiciously good. So how did you? So customer success. I get it. I understand it. But let's talk about the pieces of putting a business together that maybe aren't fun and glamorous. How did you go about learning those skill sets? The marketing, the video shooting, website, all that stuff. You make great content.
Oh, thank you. I'll back into it a little bit before that even and say the part of the business planning of that is when you get that guerrilla client and you start making some money, you have to figure out how to keep it. And so setting the accounting up, setting up your business correctly, setting up an LLC so that you can pay yourself a payroll, or taxing yourself as a corporation, all that stuff is the start of that. That's not really the focus of this podcast, but that's where it started. And then after doing that, I did join like a marketing group that walked through and sort of had a productized process and several steps to go through it. It took a long time though to iterate that. And then my process was similar to a restaurant. In a restaurant goes out that first day or two, they give away free food. You're like, how do they give away thousands of dollars of free food? But they have to work the kinks out. And so I gave my product away for very low, not even what it costs. I mean, it takes a while for me to do what I do. And I basically gave it away, but they had to pay something. You can't give it away for nothing. And even the people that paid the discount, I could tell they weren't nearly as engaged as the people that pay me now.
Not invested.
And they're not that different. They're not that different people. It's the difference, the money. So the money matters. It's how you keep score. But anyway, you had asked sort of how I rolled into that. And it was, there's a natural hesitancy. And I saw people coming into this marketing group after I'd been there for a while. And there's this hesitancy to do the upfront stuff, the stuff that exposes you, like, oh, I'll post that, but I want it to be, if I'm going to post it, it's got to be perfect. Like it's a Super Bowl commercial. That's not what we're doing. Your stuff's done in 2 hours, not even 2 days. So forget about it. Like whatever you create, the first one's going to suck and the first 10 are probably going to suck. So get those out of the way fast. I mean, and I can see that now. We all fall into that, and it's a thing, but it's one of those things. Once you've been through it, you're like, yeah, just get it out there, and it's going to suck, but it's better than not doing it at all. And you have to do that to get to the next one. The secret to my video contents, honestly, is filming a lot of my kids at sports and cutting in the different plays and doing slow motion and stuff like that. I got pretty good at that.
Editing experience. That's funny.
And it's all free stuff. I still haven't, I paid somebody to do some early videos. Some of those, you can tell the difference, but the video editor, there's several different, they start out free, and then you can upload your brand certificates or brand colors and some things like that cost more if you start doing that. And I'll probably go to that if I can't find a BA or somebody to do that stuff for me, but I still do that myself. And a lot of it is just talking about problems that when you get a customer or two, you start recognizing it's all really the same stuff. No one wants to hear their business is the same. Everyone wants to hear they're the unique flower and it's completely different. And but for us, it works this way. And okay. And you have to give them that latitude. You have to give them that. But the reality is the nuts and bolts of it just aren't that different.
Absolutely.
So
did that answer your question or did I drift?
No, that was perfect. That was perfect.
Okay.
To get into where the money matters part of it, I'm a big fan of value-based pricing. And what I always see with especially new entrepreneurs and people starting businesses is they don't understand, one, how to price their product or what they're worth. Can you kind of go into your journey on how you charge what you charge and show that type of value?
Yeah, I actually found when I started charging more, it still probably isn't enough. And I have to say, like, you can't and this is easy to say, hard to do. So full caveat, I recognize what I'm saying, is that you can't spend out of your own wallet. You can't think, oh, I charge $20,000 for an assessment. Now to an individual, you're like, what? To a business, that's like, you're going to come in and you're going to spend 3 weeks studying my process and apply expertise to it and go through the data and give me recommendations on all the stuff that you do for that. That's awesome. I mean, people drop that on hiring it costs that to hire an executive today, and just the search fee, so it's not a lot of money from that perspective when you're experiencing the pain. So for example, when you go if you've ever gone into the ER with a broken arm, they're not going to run the blood panel. They're not going to say, oh, hey, and we're going to put you in this cast and it's biodegradable plaster and we're going to put a rosewood splint. No, they're like, your arm's broken. We're going to fix the thing. You're in a lot of pain. Let's fix that thing, and you don't really care how. The guy's a doctor, he's a professional, or he wouldn't be there. So great, fix my arm. And that's the kind of problems that I want to solve. So I tend to run into those types of customers. Does that answer your question? I may have lost this question there in my story.
Yeah.
The broken arm thing was kind of fun.
It depends on your client, right? How much the problem that you're solving actually saves them, or the return on their investment. So if you're doing it to an individual, they're only going to get so much return out of it. So you can't charge nearly as much compared to a larger enterprise or things like that.
Yeah. And what to that point, what I thought was, because I'm a very ROI conscious person, and I usually talk about a 4-to-1 return, and it's well in advance of that. And so by that definition, if you really believe me, you should want to pay me more. Nobody does. It doesn't work that way. But if I'm guaranteeing a 4-to-1 return, the more you pay me, the more you get. But the reality is, it's just most people's process in the size companies I work for with, 10 to 25 million in sales, you can save a couple $1 million in churn by one or two things. It's really easy. And it's not really easy, but it's really easy from an outside perspective to see the things that are wrong when you do it over and over again. Inside, it's impossible, because everybody hires from within, and they hire from within their vertical. And so they're all the same. Think about the things the same. They see the same problems. And, we can all talk about diversity of thought and but it's really expensive to bring somebody totally from the outside and ramp them up in your business. It's hard to do. And so nobody does that. So what better to bring in somebody to get that like sort of outside infusion, while you're also paying a temporary fee, but you're getting something out of it. So I find that that's actually more valuable. I haven't figured out a way to package that or put an ROI to that. But the things I found, these are all super smart people I work with. So it's not about, oh, those idiots couldn't figure it out. It's that they're in the same tunnel together, and they've been in that tunnel for a long time. And coming from the outside, it's a lot easier. You just don't have that baggage. But anyway, to answer that question, it's not, my sales cycle has not been a ton about ROI. Like, oh, you're going to charge me that. Am I going to get, if you're going to charge me whatever you charge me, am I going to really, it's not about that. When I come in and I start demonstrating the change in process, they see how valuable that is immediately. And it turns out I think that way, but most of my customers don't think that way. So the other lesson I had to learn is, like, I'm not selling to me, because I'm a shit customer. I'm really hard to sell to. and frankly, most of my customers are not. They have pain points, and if I can push on them, demonstrate I know what I'm talking about. And I don't get into all of the stuff I do in my proposal, because that's where that matters. When you're going to read something, you really want to know that what you're buying when you're about to sign. But that's the time for that, not during the sales process.
I really like your perspective as an outsider, because I'm just thinking in terms of, like, why are these companies not solving that problem? And like you were saying, with things like HR, talent acquisition, or just being a hiring manager, it's all about managing risk. And if you bring out someone who's just way out in left field compared to something that's proven, they have the certifications, they have the prior experiences, they can check all the boxes, it's way easier to do that than somebody who may or may not work out, and the amount of disruption.
And then with all the the legalities of getting rid, it's hard to get rid of people. It's you're going to get a lawsuit depending on what state they're from. It's very difficult. It's like a very risk averse process, but rightly so. I mean, I'd love to say it's companies are looking at that wrong. They're not. I mean, you just can't run
Yeah,
a business
absolutely.
without that. They're not. So
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience who aren't, in this business or understand, they just never would understand like why someone would hire a consulting firm. They'd be like, "Oh, just bring on someone on the team and we can do this together," or "Why can't you solve your own problems?" But it makes perfect sense. You just get somebody who specializes so focused on this and can see what the forest through the trees, right?
and there's a couple of things that go with that. Like, there's two things that I think I've seen. I don't have it to a statistical certainty yet for Wyatt, but I think Tanner, you and I can talk about it. There's a compliment in there, Wyatt, I promise. But the one is like, yeah, go back and listen to the recording, you'll find it. So in some senses that, all of these new startups, and that's what I'm dealing with. Although I have one really longer term customer, that's a kind of a unique situation. But in these startups, their product is unique and solving this unique challenge in this unique way. And they're so used to talking to investors and it does this. And it's so that they get into this belief that everything else that supports that product has to be unique. And I'm telling you, the sales cycle hasn't changed in 50 years. It's just our technology's gotten a little better about it. The funnel's slightly different. But the reality is the sales process hasn't changed. People haven't evolved. We haven't changed. We think a little bit differently, but that's our physical beings haven't evolved. Things support the way that you do certain business. Accounting hasn't changed that much. I mean, those things are all the same. You don't reinvent those things. Those are the things you buy off the shelf and focus on the engineering or whatever the thing is that makes your product special. But I see so many companies reinventing the wheel and thinking they're saving money. Like, look at this masterpiece. It rolls and we can move more weight with it. It's leverage. And it's like there's 10 other people that just built that thing, but they built it themselves and had to do all the design work and thinking through it and all the pain that costs you a ton of money, but you're not writing a check for it. So that's one thing. They think that they're saving money doing it themselves. So I guess that's number two. Number one is the support pieces don't all have to be unique, even though your product, of course, is unique and the value prop and all that. Everything else around it doesn't have to be. And the second thing is just because you don't write a check for it doesn't mean it's not costing you money. I can't believe the amount of wasted time to build the thing that you could have bought off the shelf for $5,000 and you spent 30 grand in labor easily, but because those are payroll checks and you're going to pay that anyway, you pretend it didn't cost you any money.
There's so much shiny object syndrome when it comes to these new processes. Everyone wants a silver bullet. My favorite selling technique is actually the Socratic selling method, which is based off of 2,000-year-old concepts of just talk and genuinely listen to people and try to, like you talked about before, solve their problems, figure it out, identify, work deep within, and figure out what they're truly need, not just what they're asking for.
Absolutely. And it gets to some emotional pain there. If you can tie it to that, it's great. But the first question I have in my discovery process is like, okay, what motivated you to take my call? Because obviously it's a little bit different. I'll tell you a couple of stories around targeting. Well, we'll get to that maybe in a minute. But when I was targeting customer success leaders, they couldn't buy my product. They all had the pain I solved. They all faced that. It was unbelievable. I was talking to so many people, so I knew I had the right thing. They just couldn't buy it because it was a threat to them. They were supposed to be doing what I was offering them, and they couldn't because they were in the middle of Susan has FMLA and this thing, and I got to hire, but I'm short staffed and I don't really know what my hiring plan is, and this customer just blew up and this thing happened. One person can't do that. It's a monumental task, but nobody really recognizes that as a CEO or whatever. They just sort of, that's the customer success thing, So
one thing that I noticed in your content is that, and you've already said it on this podcast, your content doesn't come off as salesy and markety. It all is geared towards teaching people what customer success is, all of it. For example, one of your most recent blog posts I checked on your website it's an awesome tagline because it made me have to read it, and I don't even necessarily care about customer success. The title is Why 75% of Customer Success Leaders Lost Their Jobs Since 2021. First off, I was like, that's a gigantic percentage. I have to read that article, as I'm assuming many other people did. But all of your content seems geared toward kind of uncovering what customer success is. And I remember talking to you a couple of years ago, maybe. And I think that was, I don't know if it was a pain point or it was just something you identified that I think a lot of companies, especially SaaS, well, I guess SaaS is probably ahead of the time, but a lot of other types of companies didn't have customer success, or at least not in its, context like you know it today. Are you finding it to become more widespread? And all of this is geared towards the ultimate question of, you really niched down. And I mean, you provide a maturity model for customer success, right? Give or take. I don't mean to dumb down what
I don't call it that, but yeah,
but
no,
but
you're right.
For someone who doesn't know your terminology, it's very niche. So are you finding more and more people are accepting customer success, creating customer success teams?
No, not
or
really, because
you're just trying to reach out to them?
Yeah, it honestly doesn't fit with everybody. So the biggest marketing problem I have is I cannot LinkedIn, and I can't figure out who's a software company, a traditional software company, and who's a SaaS company. And most software companies are now SaaS companies, but for me specifically, it's B2B SaaS. I don't really want to get into the B2C stuff where you have 1,000 small customers. That's all automated, and there's not much. That's not fun for me. So, but the B2B SaaS space is huge. There's a lot of companies in that. It's just very hard to figure that out. From a marketing standpoint, I can't go get 1,000 companies that are of this size that are B2B. So there's other ways you could figure that out, and I'm working on that. But niching down is really hard to do because you think you're limiting yourself, but you're really helping yourself. It's another one of those things that's super easy to say, but almost impossible to do, because you're like, oh, but what if? Oh, but what if? And I still run into that. And when I say I run into that, I'm running into me, because I'm saying, well, I'm that little voice, right?
Right.
So, but I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that, I talk to a lot of different business leaders. It's just good business karma to help people out. And so I do that a ton. I talk to a lot of people that are looking for work or whatever that I connect to, and then end up losing their job. And it always pays off. So anyway, but back to your point, customer success is specifically around subscription-based revenue retention techniques. And so that's almost entirely SaaS or certain subscription-based models, like data companies will sell subscriptions to data, or certain sales companies will do that, whether they have a SaaS app or not. But anyone with SaaS software, particularly business to business, those procedures are, I don't want to say they're standard. You always have to customize, but there are some very good do's and don'ts. So the trick to me is focusing on those folks. I would like to talk about that article, though, because I touched on that a little bit.
Please.
So feel free to ask me another question when you get to that.
No. Let's talk about that one. So summarize that article, because that's a powerful
I talked
headline.
to. I'm going to drop an F-bomb here, so it's probably not appropriate for your audience.
You're not the first one.
I talked to 700 SaaS customer success leaders. Literally I went through the deck. 700 leaders, and not one of them could buy. All of them had the pain. I mean, by all of them, the vast majority were explaining the symptoms, and and some were just manic. I talked to them late at night and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it was just some craziness, but they weren't in a position to hire me. And I recognized that, but going through this and sort of identifying that helped me get to the next step is, what does that shit show look like to their boss? And so that's how I got to the CEO's pain of saying, do you have a customer success leader who's arguing from authority? Because they're really arguing opinion. There's no data there. And it's not because the data is not there. It's because they don't know how to capture it. And it's not their fault. They're not a bad person, right? Because when you started the company, CEO, here's how it probably went. You got this great sales guy, you got awesome data, and you knew you started with super engineers. And then you're like, oh, shit, Steve or Sarah, you take this customer thing, right? And so then that guy's got to figure that stuff out, looking at YouTube, looking at doing all this stuff. And it's fine if the company never takes off. Once the company takes off, this guy or gal is way over their head almost immediately, and you just can't catch up from that. And so then you have to argue from authority, versus data, because you just don't have any.
Mm-hmm.
Could you dive into the specific pain points that they are feeling and that you help solve?
Yeah. Which one? The CEO, the person I'm talking to now.
Let's start with the customer success manager who can't actually buy your product, and then move into the people who can actually have the decision to pay for it.
So fair enough. So most of the people, and they could completely, but they're spending out of their own pocket, and they're like, so they've been beaten down. So they've been asking for more resources because they don't really have the data to say that they need more resources, but they see it. They know that everyone's overwhelmed and they're all running around, and because there's really no process there. So they don't have a hiring plan. They can't tie that to sales. They can't tie it to any of the statistical measures that would say you need another person. And, oh, CEO, if I ask you for $100,000 to hire another person, because that's really what you're asking, what am I going to give you back? And so my little tagline there, it's actually pretty good. It's like every other customer that, or every other person that goes to your CEO says, give me X, I'll give you Y. Give me this much to invest in sales, and I'll turn it around and I'll give you, 150% of what you spent, and then, but customer success says, just give me X. Right? They don't have the other part of that formula. Just give me. And so the same person that would balk at a $15 or $100 or $15 or $20,000 fee to bring in a consultant to fix their world and take away their pain is also hitting their CEO for easily $100,000, $120,000, and just don't recognize that as the same money. It's money. It doesn't matter. That's a reoccurring expense that never goes away. So 10 years, that's $1 million too. Right. So I mean, it's and no one will remember the 20 grand that you spent to get you on the road to fix that thing. So anyway, so the pain they're facing is they're really in a challenge because the company started to grow. They got behind the curve, and their boss is telling them concepts at a high level, and they don't have it's twofold. They don't have the process, the customer success process, just the way you would capture data in a structured way and identify that and roll that up to the whole. None of that is really there, and they can't learn that. That's really hard to just learn on the fly while you're managing people. And the second thing is they don't have the ability to operationally execute it. So you can't just, for me, what I've recognized, I can't just go put in the process if they have these execution gaps, because it really doesn't matter what process they have if they can't execute it. If they're executing great, well, then it's just put in the process and that's fine. But nobody I talk to is executing very well. It's a twofold problem. I mean, you never have one without the other. And so to be an effective consultant, for me, I should say, is I need to address both sides of that. So the last thing I want to do is go write a report and leave it on somebody's desk. So I sell the evaluation and the process, but I also have the ongoing project of implementing it. So I'm doing that today for a company where I'm literally working with the front line and figuring out how to apply risks in a way that 8 people can apply them the same way. That's really hard to do, but nobody's going to buy that. Nobody buys that off the shelf, right? Because it doesn't sound very sexy and you don't think you need it. But try to get 8 people to look at the same thing and describe it the same way. It's impossible. It takes a really long time if you haven't done it a lot. So that's what I mean by the ability to operationally execute. If you see this problem, how can 8 people see that same thing and identify it exactly the same way? It takes a while.
So is this more of a case with startups where it's like a bit of the Peter principle, where people start at a certain level where they're pretty good and then they get promoted and they're way over their head?
Some of that. Yeah. So that's the original process. So funny, Wyatt brought that up, our original where we met, and that was exactly the situation there. 100% was exactly. And I've had, I'll bet 3 or 4 customers that have been exactly that situation. And sometimes you're able to save that CS leader because you teach them enough. Sometimes you're able to save them for a while. It's probably never permanent, depending on how fast the company's growing. But if you can save them for a couple of years, all the better, because it's a huge turmoil to change somebody. And then maybe that new leader only gets you to the next plateau. And then it's an order of magnitude again, where they're now managing managers and supervisors. And so it's a rare person that can scale from a totally new startup where everybody's doing everything to a structured hierarchical business with process and all of that. It's a hard change.
What would you say are top 3, 4, 5 skill sets that make a successful success leader? You know what I mean? What would you say is a valuable skill set that you see in successful leaders?
Well, it's interesting. So I think if you would ask people that hire them, they would say the ability to build relationships with customers and the ability to really, be nice to customers. Customer service, very focused. And I don't want to get into the sexism thing, but there's motherhood and there's fatherhood, mm-hmm. and they are different things. And so, like your mother is, there's a concept in startups where it's what do they call it? It's their mom questions, I think is what it's mm-hmm. called. It's like the mom complex or something. So the ability to ask questions that even your mom would answer accurately. You can't say, hey, do I look like shit today? Because of course, honey, you look beautiful. I'm not going to damage your ego. You can say, does red clash with pink? Or whatever, and they might mm-hmm. tell you the right answer to that, so you have to know how to ask that question. And people are a lot like that too. And so, so back to the skill set thing though, if you're too lovingly and motherly to customers, it means you can't have a real conversation. And that's not what it's about. So I would say the biggest skill set is data, honestly, the absolute biggest skill set. And data drives everything. And so that's easy to say, but for an example, if I'm talking to a customer and they need to do something to get what their goal is, to achieve the goal that they purchased my service for, and I can't have a confrontational conversation to tell them that, they're never going to get there. So there's a specific process that you can follow to do that. And it's got very little to do with being nice to customers or it's about knowing exactly what customers need and what they need to do. And I'm not saying you don't do that tactfully, but you have to have the data that backs it up, and no relationship's going to get you past that. Like if your product isn't producing what either the salesperson said it was, or it may, if the customer did what they were supposed to do, but they didn't really know that. And so they bought it for an expectation. If you're not producing that expectation, no relationship's going to get past that. So people that say relationships are the biggest part about customer success, that's not true, because it won't get you past those hard moments.
So it's really a mixture of competence, confidence, and authority, to where you can kind of mix all three.
Yeah. So data is number one. The second, I would say, and they kind of interchange a little bit, is I would say business acumen. So you have to know your product and know the vertical. And I think there's too much focus on the vertical and what your product's in. Am I still there? I just had a beep in my head. Okay. Yep. So you have to know, but you have to also know you have to know your customer's business well enough to make those things work in their business. So they want to achieve X. You don't really know what X is until you ask them. And most people, that's a big gap in the customer success process, is during onboarding, they're just doing training and they're teaching them and they're all this stuff. Well, no, you have to ask them some questions. Sales sold them this thing. Why'd they buy it? Where are they coming from? All of those things. And so once you know what they actually want to achieve, now you've got, it sounds wrong to say, but now you have a little bit of leverage. So think about, if I'm asking a customer to change something, it's hard to change an organization. It's hard to change ourselves. It's really hard to change an organization. So if I'm asking them to change, but I don't tell them why they need to change, then it's because you're buying my product. Oh, you bought my product. That's why you need to change. If I can go back to them and say, you want to achieve this thing, this is the goal we talked about. To do that, the best companies that do that do X, Y, and Z, and I can help you do that. Here's how I help you. But that requires a change, but that change is to achieve the thing they want to achieve, not because they bought me or my product. It's see how that's totally different. And it's a head game, but it's true.
A big thing in my life that I talk about on the podcast a lot is my theory around being a problem solver versus being an order taker. I'd be curious on your take. For me in sales, so much of it is the problem solving stage, but it sounds like you're really diving into it post sale with customer success. Where do you feel like the balance needs to be in really digging in and finding the true issues with the client? And then when does it come into just fulfilling those things?
It's a little good cop, bad cop, to be honest with you. So I'm working with a customer now where they're in the process of separating customer success, the retention activities, from sales. And that's really hard at a $50 million company level. It's one thing it's easy to put those things together because nobody really cares at the $5 million. You're just selling deals, right? You're running through it. There's no process and you're just winging it. To get from 5 to 50, it's fine to have those things combined. But once you get big enough, all of a sudden now you have a bunch of sales people and you have service people hidden within those salespeople. So if 40% of your time is retention activities and you're a salesperson, that means for every 5 salespeople I hire, 2 of them are really retention. 2 of the FTE, forget the people, not the headcount, but 2 of the work that I'm getting out of those 2/5 of that 40% of that work is service work. Well, salespeople are the most expensive. They're the hardest to retain. Everything about them is hard. So why would I want more of that? Right? Shouldn't I have this service function be separate? So it does start with sales, but it's different. So sales will talk to you about what you can achieve, but you don't want your salesperson going into how hard it's going to be to achieve that. You don't want your salespeople to go down deep because they won't sell anything. It's our job as customer success then to take that, know what those things are. And if we don't know it, then we have to ask the customer. So it all starts with onboarding, but onboarding isn't training. I mean, it is, you got to do a little bit of that, but the real onboarding, the strategic onboarding is figuring out what the customer wants to achieve. And then I've got 12 months to get them there because I know in 12 months, I'm going to have a renewal conversation. So I better have achieved what they want to achieve. And the super trick of that is customers don't know. Like, what's your goal for the project? Customers don't know that. They have no idea. Oh, I just want to run background checks, or I just want to do. Okay, you have to help them set those goals, and that's how you become sort of successful with it. Because they may think, or they may have completely unrealistic expectations of what your product's going to do. Maybe from sales, maybe they just do whatever. I don't know, right? But they have them. Then that's your chance to set those expectations. That's impossible at month 11 when you're worried about the renewal. You need to start that here and get all that information that you need. And then when you check in, you don't just check in. You check in and you say, hey, if I can't measure exactly what you're achieving, you get it from the customer and you say, oh, that compares to your goal here. And that's great. We're ahead of goal or whatever. But you see what I'm saying? You can talk to that specific value. If you can't talk to that, you're just talking.
So with sales, it's more initial discovery and kind of selling the vision. And then with customer success, it's actually like building out the journey and executing off of
100% what it should be is figuring out how to achieve the customer's goals. And if the customer doesn't know their goals, and I would say most of them, the vast majority of them don't, then it's helping them set those goals and then figuring out in what they need to change within their business to achieve what they want to achieve. It's a really hard conversation when you haven't set what they want to achieve, because then it's just, like I said, it's just your product. But if you can figure out what they want to achieve, then you can either share what other customers have done or teach them the business, how you've learned your product applies in their business. Like now you got a customer for life. Then you work on the relationship. Then you work on all that stuff. That's great. But let me tell you, if you can change their business and they're achieving something, that's the grand finale right there. And so some people might say back, well, yeah, but it's not my job to manage their process, or it's not my job to get involved with them. Well, that might be true, but who bears the consequence if you don't? Like you do, you lose the customer. So you deal with 150, 200 accounts similar to this person. Who better to know what they should do with your product than you? They don't know. They deal with one. They're in their little tunnel with all their people in the same vertical, right? We talked about it. They're all in their homogeneous little vertical. They don't know. So you have to really help them with that. And how you help them with that depends on where they came from. So the content I was working on right before this was talking about, so picture the same customer, exact same customer that comes to you, and pick anything your product does, whatever it does. This customer comes to you and they've never done it before. So they're coming to you and they're starting this thing from scratch. All the stuff they're going to have to do to make that product work. People have to log in. People have to want to log in. They got to want right? All the stuff. And then think if they're coming from a competitor. That's totally different. They have they know why they're doing it, or they have a process. They might have to tweak it to log into your product versus theirs, or whatever the case is, but they know the drill. So you're going to treat that customer differently than the brand new. Or what if they have an internal process? So now they're taking it. They used to do this internally, but it didn't work because of this or this. And so we're hiring you guys to do it now. Exact same customer in those 3 different scenarios should be serviced completely differently. Like we can all see that now when you put it that way, right? It's like that's completely different, but it's the same product and it might even be the exact same type of customer. It's just a totally different situation. So you got to know you got to understand those situations and how you apply your business that way. Does that resonate? Make sense?
It does.
Okay.
And I really love what you were talking about with kind of thinking about salespeople and customer success people as kind of like a pool of resources, and especially with salespeople. And if you have 5 people on the team, there's 8 hours in the day, you get 40 hours a day worth of effort. And that is if they were 100% productive. And we all know that we're nowhere near 100% productive. But if you're putting out 40% of that into things that aren't sales, how much are you limiting your business's potential growth by just putting these activities on them that, one, they're probably not exceptionally good at, passionate about, and would be frustrated with, and compared to giving that to a person who really understands and sole focuses on that? I've really never thought of that before, and I know very few businesses at any level that really do execute on that. So it's really
it is interesting the reason I know this really acutely is I'm working with a company. Actually, there's another company I should have signed today, but I'm hoping to sign this week. Maybe you guys will be the kiss of luck, but it's the same situation where they have customers. They have salespeople that are also doing service, and they're at an awkward stage where they want to grow. They're like $38 million revenue, and they want to grow quickly. They're kind of break out from there. You can't really do that with salespeople that do service because there's always a conflict between the two. So there's the one thing where it's two jobs. So it's two separate things that I just talked about, where you're spending half your time here and half your time here. You need twice the people then, right? And there's the other thing that it is two distinctly different jobs. So if you don't do a great job of measuring it, it's really hard to know where you should focus. So the example I gave just a couple of weeks ago was, how many times do you hold your salesperson accountable for not doing enough demos when they're hitting their number? You could give a shit how many demos they do if they're hitting their number, right? If you're blowing the quarter out, nobody cares. Well, how many customer reviews should they do? How many times should they contact an existing customer? Or how many A, B, or C? Nobody knows those things because you don't really measure those things. So how do you know if you need more or less of those things? You don't. And so you can't measure that on outputs. Sales is almost entirely measured on outputs. How much money? Show me the money, right? The service side is based on retention. But if you don't know the pieces that make up that retention, what's required to retain a customer there, it's very easy to forget about them. And the super dirty little secret there is sometimes it just happens. Sometimes you don't have to do anything. So you can kid yourself into believing I don't have to do any of that, because sometimes it works and I don't have to do anything. Back to the demo example, though. Sorry if I'm going long here, but
you're fine. You're fine.
Back to the demo part. If the sales guy isn't making his numbers, you know right where to point, right? You go, oh, well, you're not doing enough demos. You're not meeting with enough customers. You got these leads. You got to do, right where to go. You don't know that on the service side. Oh, you're losing customers. Plus, it's a totally different pool. Like, more fish in that ocean. If you screw a lead up, it's a big ocean. This is a tiny freshwater pool that I'm going to eat that fish tonight, and I just lost it. It's a little bit of different fish, right?
And it's really hard with salespeople too, where let's say you have somebody who's selling pretty well, but your churn is too high and you're not generating enough continuous revenue. So things are tight. The tighter things get and the harder it gets, the harder you squeeze something because you're losing control of it. And especially with salespeople, right when they start to get squeezed, they just move on because they have so many opportunities, because they are such a value add. A rock star salesperson has their pick of any company they want, because anywhere they go to, they're just going to generate money. And so it is a snowball effect. Yeah.
So Dan, and maybe I'm getting too far in the weeds, but this is how my mind works. Your example about the salespeople who provide service as well makes complete sense. That this should be separated. But how do you reconcile, because in a success world, they have to provide service and also sell, right?
Well, in some cases. So it depends. So not all cases. And I've kind of changed my thinking on that, not recently, but it's kind of evolved. So either there's a couple of different models there, and I don't fight City Hall on any of this stuff. And what I mean by that, if a company has this is the way, I don't come into that perpendicular, because that's not going to work for me. So nothing is a yes or no. It's like, okay, if you want to do it that way, then you got to consider these things. And so part of it is, most of the time, if customer success people aren't responsible for sales, They might be responsible for the renewal, which isn't quite like sales. That's a very insular, insulated
Fair.
sales, as we say, a very low risk, or maybe some upsells. And a couple of ways they're responsible for upsells is probably not driving the upsell itself, but recognizing the pieces that should suggest the opportunity. So if they find it's this case with this thing and that thing, then they create the opportunity, kick it over to sales to make the revenue. So sales continues to ring the cash register. That happens sometimes. If you have real hardcore what I would say the real battle tested customer success professional, the guy that makes 120, 150 grand a year. And these aren't Nebraska wages, by the way, guys. These are coastal wages. But anyway, those guys will absolutely do sales. It is a bit of a conflicting message. I used to not believe that. I believe you could do them both. The challenge comes in is when they're trying to, there's a built-in fudge factor, if you will, or built-in sort of when you want me to buy something, you may have a perfectly good reason, rational for it, but I also know you want me to buy that thing. So whatever you're telling me, I build in a little percentage of sales bullshit. And I don't know how much that is. Like if you're really laying it on thick, then you're just a good sales guy, and maybe it's 50-50, So I see that, and it does conflict a little bit with the service message.
That's fair, though. That was a good explanation.
I'm loving this distinction between customer success and sales. So there was always an analogy that I've done for a long time, and I'd love to get your take on it. There's the idea of hunters and farmers. Is really just a farmer a really good customer success person, or is that a type of salesman still?
Yeah, I don't believe that. So I think the whole combined thing, the reason people do that is a different reason than what's best for the business. A lot of times people do that because the commission plan is so complicated and they're terrified to unwind it, honestly. Yeah. And so they will fight tooth and nails with every other reason in the book, and they won't tell you that that's why. It's a shit show to unwind this commission plan, and I can't do it. It's going to drive people. I don't want to even touch that. So this must be wrong. Right? Because if we do this, then I have to change this. And so the concept, I think, early on works well with the combining of salespeople because it's just easy. And you don't want to bite that pill if you don't have to. And that whole ratio thing doesn't really matter when you have a couple of salespeople. If you got 20, it matters, but it doesn't when you're small, right? So that's all fine. And then you turn, what I've always said about that, Tanner, back to your question, is you can turn a really good hunter into a bad farmer. Rarely do you take a good hunter and turn them into a good farmer. It doesn't work that way. So they were never cut out to be if they really were a good hunter, they were never cut out to be a great farmer. And so you've sort of taught them by your commission plan, hey, you know what? I can just plow these fields. That's a shitload easier than going out and shooting new birds every time. So I'm going to go back and I don't have the attention to detail to do all this stuff. So I'm going to half-ass plow the field because sometimes it grows anyway. And maybe the yield's not as good, but that's okay. Now that's a bad farmer, right? So anyway, that's the example that I actually used with a customer 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense because I see that so many times where you get people who are so driven that they're all about the deal. They hunt. They love the business development part. They love landing that yes to get the contract signed and then just fall to pieces right after that. And then vice versa. There's other people that can't do business development to save their life.
Right. And there are two totally different functions. So if you're small, those things just sort of merge together and you don't have to get too specific about it. The problem is once you start to grow to any significant size, and in my mind, it's that $40 to $50 million mark, but you probably had some growing pains earlier on, is that now to divide that out is a real headache because you're totally changing somebody's comp structure. And you have to, that's difficult to do just from a change management. And they're used to getting paid for nothing over here. It's really hard to do that. It's impossible to do that if you don't have somebody from the outside saying, hey, it's going to be okay. You'll get through this. Because everyone inside is saying, this is bloody murder. You're killing children. This is horrible. You're taking food from my mouth. You blah, blah, blah. It's like nobody wants to fight that battle, especially when there's no outside voice. It's like, you'll get through this. Because I've done it a dozen times,
If you're a company, let's say in the $1 to $5 million per year revenue range, is there a way of kind of setting things up to scale more effectively to transition into that, or what can you do at the base?
But it depends. Like my opinion, I don't have any data to suggest this, but my opinion is that there's a lot of companies that are that $1 to $5 million mark that don't really need to be 25 or 50 million and don't really anticipate that they're not. You could do just fine at $5 million, with a handful of people. You don't need a lot more. So it depends on what your growth trajectory needs to be and what you expect. Like if you're going to grow and you have investors that want $1 billion company, yeah, you should absolutely, you got to set that up differently and set it up. If you're going to move along and be fine at the under $10 million mark, and I'm not minimizing that like it's some hack thing. I mean, that's legitimate. If you're making over $1 million in your business, you're doing really well in my book. But that will impede your ability to scale. But how much are you really going to scale?
So if you're trying to build a rocket ship, I love this analogy with startups. You can't put rocket fuel in a car because it'll explode, but we're building rockets here. We're going to shoot for the moon. What would you say is a good foundational way to configure things, though, so that you don't run into all these friction points once you hit, past that 5 million threshold, hit 10, 20 plus?
I would say that it's easier to combine service and success and break those apart than it is success being revenue retention, that it's easier to combine those things than it is to combine sales and success. And if you're combining sales and service, then you're small time, and that's going to be hard to break out of that anyway. If sales does all of your it does everything, then you're just a really small company and you're just going like, and I'm not knocking that because I do it all myself too. Right? Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying at a certain level, you really separate out sales and service. And I would say success is easier to break away from service than it is to break away from sales, because you're coming down from sales and you're coming up from service. It's a promotion opportunity. Does that make sense?
Sure. Okay, so one of my less fun duties on this podcast is I'm the timekeeper, and we're almost there. I know I've got to be that guy. But Dan, before we go and do the outros and all that good stuff, if people wanted to learn more about you, view your content, where would you direct them?
Oh, this is your opportunity. You can go to my website, which is Predictive Customer Success, and book a meeting with me, or you just reach out to me on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you more about that. Like I talk to people who are, January, my biggest advice I gave people was an action verb list. And it's a list of action verbs to put on your resume to start your bullet points with, that start out with, if I want to show that I'm a communicator or I'm an operations person or I'm this or I'm that, it's use these verbs. It's a couple pages worth of verbs I downloaded 10 years ago that you want to start your bullets with an action verb. So long story short, too late, I know, but I talk with all kinds of people for all kinds of things, and it's just good karma. I never turn down a meeting. If someone wants to talk about customer success, I'll talk all day long. If they just want to talk about career advice, I don't get paid. I'm never going to get paid for that. But I say that, and I have to tell you this last quick story on that.
Of course.
I spoke to a guy in December. This was December 2021, I think. And he was a young guy and he was going to quit without a job because he had 5 other people that were talking to him. And I'm like, just the basic advice I would say is like, don't quit without a job. Those people will evaporate. When you have an offer, then you have something to turn down, blah, 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 blah. Get paid to leave, I said. I remember I was late. It was like 8:00 at night in December. So it seemed even later. It's been dark for hours. Right. And so the guy's like, okay. And he did it all. He actually did what I asked him to do, which is not common. And so I just followed up with him kind of randomly a couple of weeks later. And he's like, oh my God, I got paid to leave the CEO. I met with the CEO. He said, yeah, we'd love to keep you to help this guy. Da, 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 da. So they got paid and I got this job, and you were right. If I'd have left, they wouldn't have hired me. Da, da. So he moved his career, did all this, and it worked out really well. So he's just, dying to pay me back. How could he pay me? And he made a referral up to the company that I ended up jumping to for the W-2 job. And that paid extremely well. So it was this random 24-year-old kid out of New York that I would give advice to my own kid. It was just,
Mm-hmm.
it was just, and I spent an extra hour with him talking about him, and it ended up getting me a huge deal. So like a couple $100,000 in revenue. So like it was a big deal. It was only because he was like, oh, hey, somebody tried to recruit him. He said, you don't need me. You should talk to this guy. He can set up your process and do all that. So anyway, he and I talked. I paid him a referral, and he and I met in New York when I was there. We had a beer. It was actually really cool. But that's the example of just good business karma. You could never map that out to say, oh, I'll get leads from people I'm helping find a job. It doesn't work that way, So if you're in customer success, if you're in SaaS software, I'd love to talk to you about how to set that up. And not all customers there's not a commercial deal in every person I talk to. In fact, most of them there aren't. And so same thing with my content. I'm much more about if I can speak to your problem, show credibility, then when you have a need and you need somebody to do that, who else would you go to?
Love it. Well, Dan, first off, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. I really appreciate you. Thank you for an awesome conversation. I really had no idea where this was going to go. And I knew,
sorry if it was too much. I kind of on a roll tonight. So
all I knew is that you and Tanner would hit it off like crazy because you both nerd out on the same things. But Dan, as you mentioned, putting out good karma, getting good back. You have helped me in the past. I greatly appreciate our friendship. Thank you for coming on the show. Maybe in a year or two when you're your own giant conglomerate consulting company, you can come back on and give us some updates on that stuff. But
anytime, I'll be back. And Tanner, if you want to chat offline, we'll nerd out together.
Exactly.
All right. Tanner, sign us off then.
Yeah, no. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us. Make sure to like and subscribe to our videos, our Spotify's, all those things. But while you're doing that, also go like and subscribe all of Dan's videos. We have had just such amazing positive responses these past few weeks, so we'd love to keep that rolling. The other part too, if you've made it this far, please share these episodes with your friends, because there's always one or two valuable nuggets I feel that you can take away from any of these episodes. And like Dan said, pay it forward, because you never know how you might be able to improve, their lives as well. So, well, thank everyone for coming. Thanks everybody for coming. We'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye, guys.